Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Aaron Diaz, and you're listening to episode number 24 of Live the Good Life from the podcast studios of Aaron's Wine Chronicles corporate headquarters in the heart of Washington wine country. Today, I'll be joined by a good friend of mine and a friend of the Live the Good Life podcast. He's a longtime connoisseur of wine and is one of my favorite people to go wine tasting with. He has a well-developed and discriminating palate and sense of smell, so he's the perfect guest today as we delve into wine aromas and why people smell wines. That's our topic. The objective here is to help people who are relatively new to wine be able to better understand why people sniff their wine and what they're searching for and why they focus on wine aromas. We'll try to dispel some myths about smelling wine, and we'll also use basic layman's terms to describe the world of wine aromas to you. By the end of today's podcast, our hope is that you'll feel much less intimidated and much more comfortable burying your nose into a glass of wine just before you start to taste it. And making sense of whatever you discover as you're smelling that wine. It's all part of the wine experience. So let's get this started. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. John Paul LeCompte to the show. Well, they certainly do like you here at Aaron's Wine Chronicles, John Paul.
Yes, they do. I'd say it won't be the first time I've had applause or the last.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to come down and join our podcast. Why don't you give us a little background and introduce yourself to our audience?
Background on me from the wine side. Let's start there. So I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I was born in Vancouver, Washington, but moved out to the east side of the state. So I was pretty much born and raised here, I say. I was only 5 when I came out here.
Oh, wow.
But the big piece of the wine tie into that is that if you grow up in eastern Washington, you're going to inevitably be around wine, whether that be friends, family, home, parties, dinner, whatever it may be.
Right.
And I honestly didn't really get into wine until I was probably in my early 20s. I'd been around it quite a bit, but that was really the first time I started enjoying it.
So that's a little bit earlier than me. I had tried wine in my teens and 20s. I didn't really get to the point where I appreciated it and enjoyed it until I was in my early 30s. That's how, that's a big difference. I mean, you've got 12, 13, 14 years on me.
Well, I mean, when I say the early 20s, I'm not going to try and fool anybody and say I didn't start out by drinking a Riesling.
Yeah, right.
Or a really buttery Chardonnay.
No, but I mean, I started with the sweet wines. I'm talking about the, what's that? Really, I don't even remember the name of the grape anymore. The starts with an M, and it's like 30% residual sugars.
Oh, now you're going to put me on the spot. No, I remember it.
Yeah. Anyway, they used to sell these around as dessert wines at some wineries, and I would drink those, and I wouldn't drink anything else. That's how I started. But like anything, I evolved. Well, again, thank you for being here. It's great finally having you on the show. We've talked about it for a while. We have a tradition, I think, that you're aware of here at Aaron's Wine Chronicles. While we are in the studio doing the recording, it's always customary for us to have some sort of libation. Well, today's libation, while we're recording, is a red wine. In this case, it's a 2016 Cooper Estate Cabernet Sauvignon. The winemaker was Neil Cooper, and the grapes were sourced from Red Mountain AVA. We've been sipping on this for just a little bit. I had the bottle near me somewhere. I was going to show the bottle, but anyway, can you grab it? Or? Yeah, this is a 2016, so it's been in the bottle for about, for those of you on the video podcast, you can see the bottle. Take it back a little bit. There you go. So Neil Cooper has a winery there right at the beginning of Sunset Road there as you're going up the hill, and he makes some really fine wines. What do you think? What are your thoughts on this?
I would say so far so good. It has a lot of the characteristics I would expect from a Red Mountain cab, as we discussed a little bit on our first few sips. But so far, it's opened up nicely, and I'm enjoying it.
So, okay, what are some of your favorite types of wine. We've talked about this. We've gone tasting. We've spent some time drinking wine both here at our homes and out at different wineries. But for the audience, what are your favorite types of wine? And can you name maybe your top 3, 4 wineries that you like in Washington or in the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, the wine variety wise, I mean, I'm a sucker for 100% Cab Franc, but I also enjoy some of the blends that are, even as low as maybe a 20% Cab Franc utilized. But you introduced me to GSMs, probably, what was that, probably 4 or 5 years ago. Kind of went down that road, and
yeah,
so always enjoyable as well. Love Syrahs, and it's one of those things where I rarely drink a white wine anymore. If it's a hot summer day, I might.
You sound like me.
Might partake.
Yeah.
But mainly reds for sure. Some of the favorite wineries locally around here, Fidelitas, Frechette. I enjoy those in the Red Mountain area. If we're heading down to Walla Walla, as you and I have done many times in the past. I'm just trying to think. Lagana's good. I enjoy I enjoy their Malbec. Malbec's another one that I'm a sucker for. Yeah. I don't want it to be overly peppery, but I do want a little bit of that spice in there.
Right.
Canvasback's another one I really enjoy. So, but again, you've taken me to so many that it's hard to narrow it down to 3.
That's what I do. I take people places. Sometimes places you don't want to go.
Well, that's a different podcast.
Yeah, a whole different podcast. Well, that's a nice segue into the topic of the day, John Paul. Wine aromas. Why do people smell their wine? Back in episode 2, my brother Adam and I covered a lot of wine basics, including the various steps in wine tasting and evaluating a wine. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into one of those steps, and likely the most important of the steps, as far as I'm concerned. It takes advantage of your sense of smell. And let's face it, the reality is that most wine lovers aren't sommeliers or wine pros. They're just like you and me, John Paul. They're people who love wine for what it is. We like to grab wine and pair it with food. We like to share wine with friends and family. It just elevates the game, the whole game, whether it's a meal, whether it's an intellectual conversation with a friend, whether it's playing backgammon and getting beat by me. Whatever the case is, the wine always elevates the game, right?
I agree.
So I'd like to ask you, when you smell a wine before you taste it, what is it that you're looking for? What do you do? What is it that you do when you're smelling a wine?
Well, I think the number one is, that's your first introduction to that wine and what it possibly has to offer or is going to show you. But the biggest thing, when you first put that, it would be even when you're pouring the glass, you might be able to pick up on something. If by off chance it was spoiled, oxidized, corked, one of those things, you would hopefully initially pick up on it when you're pouring it. But if not, this step is where you would find that. And that would be pretty self-evident if it was one of those things that I previously mentioned. But really, the aromas, like I said, the first entrance, the introduction, it's like a handshake with your senses. Said, hey, this is what's about to happen. And you can pull so many things from that, how the wine was made, how it was stored. A lot of things like how long it sat on the grapes. All these things that you and I have talked about so many times. But our sense of smell, I think we've all had this. I think a good example is when you walk into a restaurant and you get that smell. It may be familiar or unfamiliar, and you already perceive how something's going to taste.
Right.
And so those things they drive down the highway hand in hand. And really you're setting yourself up for a way, way more enjoyable tasting experience if you have even a entry level knowledge of aromas of wine and what you're looking for and possibly hoping to find.
Yeah. Some wines, and we were just talking about this earlier when we cracked open this bottle before starting to record. Some wines are a lot more subtle with the intensity of what they offer, both flavor-wise and aromas, right? Some are very subtle, and some blow up in your face. And some are very simple. Some wines, they might give you one fruit that really dominates. They might give you maybe a hint of something else, and that's about it. That's all you get off of it. And you drink it. It's a simple wine. It's not complex in layers of different flavors and different aromas, right? And other wines are more complex. They'll blow up in your face as you put your nose into that glass, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that's an experience where, okay, whoa, I'm getting all kinds of information from the wine. Wine is kind of like almost like a puzzle or a riddle. You want to try to figure it out because oftentimes you don't know all the details of the wine. And even if you do, you still have to find out for yourself how you're perceiving that wine. Do you like it? Is it buyable? Do you not like it for some reason? And why not? Because sometimes it's better to know why you don't like a wine or don't like the way it smells or tastes than knowing what you do like, because you're going to encounter many wines that are probably similar to what you don't like more often than what you do like. Yeah. So it's like a filter, right? And if you become better at honing your sensory perception, then now you're in the driver's seat. When you go out to wine taste, you're confident. You don't have to have 15 letters after your name with all these certifications, and you're not a pro. You're not even getting paid to judge wines or anything like that. You just know that when you go into that winery and you sit down, you've got control of your senses, and you know what you like and what you don't like. Give me 15 wines, and I can tell you with high confidence whether or not I like the wine, pretty much why I like the wine, and whether or not I'm going to buy it.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
And I don't go home and wake up the next day and I'm serving the wine to friends and I'm like, why the hell did I buy this wine? This sucks, right? That doesn't happen anymore. But it happened a hell of a lot when I was early in the game, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and there's that old adage that a lot of people think good wine is expensive wine. And,
that's a myth right there, right?
Yeah, it's 100% a myth. And I think that's even more of a fun wine journey to take if you've been in it for a couple of years, or even if you're just getting started, is go out and see if you can find a $20 bottle that drinks like a supposed $150 bottle. You,
my friend, are the master at that. And I'm not saying that. How many times have we had this discussion where you've called me and said, hey, you got to try this. I got X amount of bottles from this person or this place, or I found this cache where, I bought a bunch and they were cheap. They were $10 a bottle or something, whatever. And you're going to love them. And I'm thinking to myself, oh man, the guy's smoking crack again. And then we sit down with a bottle and it's like, whoa, are you kidding me, right? But you really, out of all the people that I taste wine with, all the people that I kind of know in my circle of winos, you are the guy that really has, I don't know, it's almost a superpower or a skill. You can find wines that are moderately priced, even sometimes really well priced, like beyond what you would think it costs, and actually bottle it and put a label on it, right? And they're really good wines. I'm really impressed with that because you do it time and again.
Yeah, and maybe it's just dumb luck or just the being silly enough to go out and try that many bottles of wine.
Yeah. But when you're trying them, what are you doing? You're also smelling them. You're looking at them.
100%.
And you're tasting them. So you're using all of your senses to get a signature, like a fingerprint for that wine. And then you're taking that fingerprint against your database of all the other fingerprints the ones that you've liked, and you're saying, do I like that? Why do I like it? Does it compare with all these other wines? And that's how you do it. So smelling a wine is critical to you making a decision as to whether or not you're going to like it, it's going to be good, you're going to recommend it to others, you're going to buy it, right?
Yeah, and again, I go back to it's a handshake. It's that first handshake introduction to your body and your senses saying, am I going to like it or is this going to be a hard pass?
Our sense of smell is highly correlated to our sense of taste, right? I mean, we all know that. And so, you just have to understand that when you're smelling something, you are, like you said earlier, you're setting yourself up in anticipation of the flavors. So that's why this is probably one of the most important steps of wine tasting. I think, what we just talked about are all really good examples of what people can deduce from evaluating the aromas of wine. Wines, for me, tend to have like a signature, or they show trends, with depending on the type of wine that you're sampling. Signature aromas are often present in specific wines fabricated from specific grapes. For instance, if I'm talking about a Pinot Noir. For me, in my experiences, sampling Pinot Noirs, both here in Eastern Washington, there's not a ton, but there's a lot more in Oregon. Doing that, for me, those types of wines, generally speaking, now this isn't 100%. I don't want to make hasty generalizations. They don't go over well, but I would say that based on my experience, and you can correct me if I'm wrong based on your experience, but there's no right or wrong, right? It's just that I perceive Pinots to have lots of strawberry, raspberry, cherry type aromas, and even flavors. Oftentimes they are linked, but what you'll find is they're not always linked, right? Oftentimes you'll get certain aromas very distinctly with your nose, but then when you go to taste them, you'll get something different. It may be somewhat related. Maybe it's a fruit, but it might be a dark black fruit instead of a red fruit that's on your nose, right?
I agree, 100%. And especially with the Pinots, they're just much more lighter, and I would say at least 75 to 80% of them, I would agree with, that strawberry or that cherry, that lighter fruit flavor.
Yeah. Another example I give is like for a white wine, like a Sauvignon Blanc. You chill a Sauvignon Blanc on a hot summer day, and it's going to be really good oftentimes, right? There's some that are crap, right? Like everything else. But you get a typical Sauvignon Blanc that I'm going to want to buy often exhibits like on the nose for aromas, tropical fruit, sometimes melon or tree fruit with maybe a hint of citrus, right? And again, you can get some that actually emphasize that on the palate, the taste palate. And then you can get some that just don't. You might smell it, and it's crisp when you drink it. You don't just get all of those. You might get one fruit out of those, but on the nose, you can certainly get kind of a nice experience from discrete wines. A lot of times you'll get these profiles that you're getting. You'll generate a profile by smelling it that you would never anticipate.
Yeah, that's a great example. And, you brought up Sauv Blancs. I had an experience this summer. Like I said, I don't drink a lot of these.
Yeah.
And was down in Walla Walla doing some tasting. And I think it was maybe the second or third stop. So it wasn't like it had been a heavy day. I went in and just did the tasting flight, and I saw, it's got a Sauv Blanc. Oh, this is going to be great. I mean, not super excited about it. Mm-hmm. I ended up leaving there with 2 bottles of it.
Nice. Yeah, that's rare. For me, it'd be rare because I don't. Yeah.
For me, it's equally as rare for me. It's just not something I do. But it was more on that melon side, mm-hmm. and so I think I love any melon. So for me, having that smell, that it did have a strong melon smell, like almost when you're cutting or peeling one.
Reminds me of the movie Back to School with melon. You're a melon. Oh.
But anyways, that smell and then that taste, and they did.
For sure.
But in that instance, they did correlate.
Yeah.
And like I said, brought home 2 bottles and enjoyed them this summer on the patio. And
I don't want to give the audience the thought or the perception that we are knocking white wines. We just happen to be red wine guys. Generally speaking, I won't buy white wines because I want to focus all of my money that I do have on the reds because I'm going to buy a ton of reds all the time. But my wife, when she's with me, she tempers that. She actually will want a rosé or some sort of white that, when chilled, is refreshing and fruity, even though it's dry. You get that fruit on it. She loves that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's about as much as we do as well. My wife and I, it's she enjoys a nice rosé and some of the whites, even the sparkling whites, and so I will dabble a little bit in those. But by far, I agree with you. I'm saving my money for the red game.
Okay. So, there are various categories of wine, or I guess tiers of wine. I'm sorry, not wine, aromas. I'm talking wine aromas.
Yeah.
What are your perceptions of these different tiers of wine aromas?
Well, I mean, really primary is the word that comes to mind first. Obviously, you have the primary aromas that are just the grapes. You're going to get your heavy fruits, your floral notes, the herbs and spices off of those primaries. And then that's your initial foray into, what's this going to be? This is nice. It's very floral. I like this. Or floral might not be your thing. You might get into that first primary and say, oh, I'm a little worried now. This smells pretty floral. I'm going to have to pump the brakes. Or you know what? I'm going to give it a chance. And 9 times out of 10, you and I are always going to give it a chance. Or else you wouldn't be living the good life. Yeah. And then you move into you talked about the tiered system. Then you move into the secondary aromas. These would be more scents coming from the fermentation process. yeast or other microbial processes that happen there. And we're looking here, more of the earthy aromas, the soil.
Like forest floor, like you put your face into the floor of the forest, and you just got earth and mushrooms and whatever else you can smell.
Exactly. And then you get into some of the leather, the pencil lead, graphite type clay.
Right.
We've talked through these, and honestly, I mean, some of these are a little more difficult for me to pick up when you get into those pencil lead graphite type situations. I don't do as well with those, but
really, I do well with them, not necessarily on the nose, but I can taste graphite in wines on my palate.
I would agree with the palate, but for me, not
But the aroma,
and again, everyone's different.
Right.
That's why this is so fun.
Right.
It's because there is no set standard that, you have to smell that. The third category, we get into more of the tertiary aromas. These comes from how they're aged. And every winemaker has a different, secret sauce in the way they make wine. And some of that is how it's aged. You look at the barrels, you look at the level of toast on those barrels, and what that imparts to the wine and what the wine will retain from that as well. So you're looking at your cedars, vanillas, oaks, possibly some baking spices.
That's interesting. You mentioned toast. For those of you listening to the podcast who are not necessarily knowledgeable about the barrels, the wine barrels that store the wine and age the wine, where they fabricate these in France and other countries, and here in the U.S. as well, they have a process called toasting. So they actually burn the inside walls of they light them on fire, and they toast them for a certain amount of time, a duration at a certain heat, whatever, and they can do all the way over a spectrum of toasts. So it's from light to heavy and multiple levels in between, and the different toasts of the different woods that the barrels are fabricated from will impart different attributes into the wine at different intensities. So it's a science in and of itself. That might be something that we could even do another podcast about alone in the future, because there's a lot of art and science mixed together when you start talking about that part of the winemaking process. Well, barrels, right?
And even watching how they toast those barrels is a fascinating process.
Yeah,
I mean, and YouTube's great. You can type it in and watch it.
Go online. You
definitely some skilled craftspeople in that endeavor.
So you talked about three. You talked about primary, secondary, and tertiary aromas. There are also, I guess, I don't know, it's probably another class of aromas that offer very distinct signature scents. And typically they result from the wine exhibiting what's called a wine fault. And this is where the wine is somehow altered in a negative way, so to the point where you don't want to drink it. It's either spoiled or it's got some sort of molecule in it that makes it taste bad or smell bad. And this is typically due to improper storage or handling somewhere in the process. One example of a wine fault is called a tainted cork wine fault, which contains a molecule called TCA, which is trichloroanisole. John Paul mentioned cork taint a little earlier in the discussion, and this is what he was referring to. TCA is a molecule that results when certain fungi that naturally occurs in the cork and in the wood of the cork tree, when those fungi come in contact with certain classes or types of chlorides, you get this resultant molecule that can pop up, and it's called TCA. And when that molecule starts to pop up, when that reaction occurs between the chlorides and the fungi, you get this unique, nasty smell. And this is part of the reason why when somebody at a fine restaurant pops open a bottle of wine for you, the first thing they'll do is they'll take the cork and they'll smell the cork, because that's where you get the most intensity of this TCA, where it'll be in the cork that you just pulled out of the bottle. It's very similar. The scent of this TCA is very similar to a wet dog that's been sleeping in a nasty, damp, musky basement for like 2 weeks and hasn't eaten or slept and pooped a lot, and so it's a really bad smell. But it's very unique. And once you've smelled it, and I've smelled it a couple of times in my life, and I've had a few bottles that I've had to throw out because of it, but it's rare. It doesn't happen all the time. And of course, it only happens when you're using real cork. When you're using synthetic cork or, some other, mechanism, or you got a screw cap on or whatever, it's not going to happen, right? So that's one other class of aromas, which are wine faults that occur that you may or may not want to at some point familiarize yourself with. I would say that studying these various wine aromas that we're talking about allows you to, and understanding their significance as you smell wines and sip on them, can really help you develop a better overall understanding of what the wine is all about, what the wine is trying to tell you. So, you have any last comments on that part of it, John Paul?
No, a lot of, I guess just one. You'll know it. Especially with a corked bottle.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to tell. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of the process here is actually having to unfortunately you can train your nose to it, but having to unfortunately go through the experience.
Yeah, you have to.
and that's the best trainer for humans, let's say. Once you experience something, mm-hmm. you now store that away and file it. It's in there. Yeah. It's never going to go away.
I'm with you. So now we've taken some time to better understand some of the reasoning, the rationale behind why people take the time to sample the aromas and the scents that are given off by their glass of wine. Next, let's discuss how it's done. And you might think, well, it's simple. You just put your nose in there and breathe. Well, that's true, but there's more to it than that. There are some little tips and tricks of the trade that will help you to amplify that experience for you, especially for people who maybe have a duller sense of smell. I know people, my dad used to, you could step in dog poop and come into the house and unless he was standing very close to you, he wouldn't smell it, right? And so people that maybe have duller senses of smell, they typically end up making it up in some other sense. But the case is that you really want to be able to get an understanding of why you're doing it and what you're looking for. So I guess my next question is, let's talk about how both of us actually enjoy the aromas of wine. John Paul, you take us through your process for smelling wine aromas in a glass. We both got our wine glasses here. Let's go ahead and just talk to the audience and take them through how you would do it.
Well, first I'll throw out a disclaimer here. All of this my knowledge was acquired through being out and about in wineries doing tastings or restaurants. And initially, early 20s, I was a sponge trying to soak up what I didn't know.
Yeah.
And some of it may have been incorrect. Some of it may have been correct, and I just carried it on. But I will say mine is not just a smell. So usually when I'm going to taste, obviously it's poured into the glass. I'm going to hold the glass by the stem, not the bowl of the glass. And I'm going to just take a very quick initial smell from the center of the glass, not bury my nose below the rim of the glass, and then file that away, hold on to it, and then I take the smallest sip. Not even, barely enough to...
So you smell and sip.
Smell and sip, barely enough to wet the inside of the mouth.
Right.
And then after that, swallow, kind of think about it for a second or two, and then I'm going to have the first swirl of the glass, and then go in for another smell of what those aromas are now.
Yeah.
That I've had the chance to smell and taste.
So you take an iterative approach where you're taking little steps, and each step adds another layer of sensory perception about the wine, right?
Correct, because when you get into a situation where you have like a big bold, like a Bordeaux blend, mm-hmm. You've got so much going on in there that you cannot be expected to, I don't care how big of a sniff you take initially, you're not going to get everything. And so I think a more layered approach is just how I figured out what works for me, mm-hmm. to pick up a few more of those aromas.
Cool. So now we'll talk about my way, and it's not much different, but there are some differences. And I will say that I was talking to John Paul about this before we came on, and one thing that he forgot to mention that I know that he does as well is that he opens his mouth a little bit too sometimes when you're sniffing. if you put your nose into the glass and you keep your mouth open, and you can even breathe a little bit into your mouth and into your nose simultaneously, you tend to open up more sensory, I don't know, nerves or pores or whatever they are, because it seems like if you keep your mouth closed and you're just breathing in through your nostrils, you'll get, some subset of what you're breathing. But if you open up your mouth, it just amplifies those aromas. It amplifies that experience.
Yeah, and a lot of times, as we discussed, I don't do that necessarily every time, but if it is a lighter aromaed wine, I do find that will allow me to draw in a little bit more and take advantage of a little bit of almost the taste buds I have in my mouth that are correlated to my olfactory senses as well.
Yeah, I don't know. Many of you listening to this podcast may have pets, and if you have a cat, like I do, once in a while you'll see your cat, and he'll be sniffing something on the floor, and then he'll lift his head and open his mouth up and just kind of sit there and breathe through his mouth. And I see it, and it looks like he's some sort of lion in the Serengeti or something, but what they're doing is he's sensing something, and he's trying to get a better idea of what he's smelling. And it's the same thing. It's just the analogy that I think of when I do it. I'm like, oh, I'm acting like my cat. But one of the main things that I do when I'm looking for the aromatic profile of a wine is I'll turn my glass sideways. And oftentimes, if you're in a wine tasting room where they're giving you a 1 ounce pour or a 1.5 or maybe even a 2 ounce pour, they have a decent sized red wine glass, you can turn that glass 180 degrees, completely horizontal, put it on a table and roll it back. I know it sounds a little bit odd, but what you're doing is you're essentially taking that wine, you're rotating the wine, and you are coating a layer of wine on the inside of the glass almost all the way up to the rim. And you're seeing I'm doing it right now into the camera. So for those of you who are watching the video podcast, you can see it. And then when you take your nose and you put it inside the glass, it literally amplifies all of those aromas by at least a factor of 2. I don't know. It's hard to quantify, but just try it sometime. It's amazing what it does. I learned that from a friend of mine, JJ Campo, who was a guest of the Live the Good Life podcast a few episodes back. And JJ now, when he serves us wine, he'll take the glass and he'll simply just give it a quick roll like this, and then he'll give it to you. And then, you can swirl it, do whatever. But what's happening is you're lining all the inside of that glass so the surface area of wine has been increased some. And when you put your nose in, all that air has to go up by the inside walls of the glass to your nose, and it's just multiplying that scent that's coming off the wine.
I agree. I do it all. You were the one that taught it to me. Like I said, I just soak up what I can from other folks, and it's like throwing a little fan inside that glass when you put your nose back in after doing that. You just kind of get hit with those intense aromas.
One other thing that I'd like to talk about is that I learned from William Pollard, who actually is a staff member up at Col Solare in the tasting room there, and he's been around. He's a wine pro in every sense of the word. He worked at Watoma Springs for a while as well, and before that he was at the Walter Clore Wine Institute there in Prosser when it was going full bore. And I was at a wine event there with him, and we were chatting, and he took the wine, and he was sniffing the wine, and he tilted his head, and he put only like half of his nose in the glass. And I asked him what he was doing, and he said, I do that periodically because I have a dominant, everybody does. And he started explaining to me that you have a dominant nostril and a not so dominant nostril. And you can tell the difference when you turn one side of your head and another. You'll get different intensities and sometimes even different scents you'll be privy to just with your own nose. And I learned that, and I incorporate that into my wine sniffing all the time, and it works really well. So that's just something to understand, and it's something that you can do. You can figure that out really quickly with anything. Just go into the kitchen and put something in a glass. It doesn't have to be a liquid. It can be anything.
Yeah, and that's another one that I picked up from you after. It must have been after that, obviously. And at first you were like, "Yeah, just try it." And I was like, "Oh, okay, well, this looks kind of weird," but yeah, it's almost an instantaneous. You realize one is better than the other,
right?
But when we talk about smell, I mean, people are sitting here listening to this probably saying, well, what if I can't smell all these things? How do I get better? How do I improve that ability?
Yeah.
Because some people just want to identify the basics, and that's
Right.
and honestly, that's the best way to start. I mean, no one expects you to be the person. If you're not doing this for a living, no one expects you to be able to sit down and pick out 8 different things that everyone should smell.
Right.
But, just having that general base knowledge is something people are, I think, wanting, or at least wanting the information of how to get it. So, I mean, right off the bat, the first thing you can do, repetition is key. You build that muscle.
Yeah.
You build that muscle memory. I mean, the more you do it, the better you're going to get. That's just a
Right.
cold hard facts. And honestly, it's fun. We've gone tasting plenty of times, and it's always a great day. Whether you're hitting 2 spots or 5 spots, it doesn't matter. It's a lot of fun.
I still get excited when I see 5 or 6 glasses of wine in front of me. They all got 1.5 inch or 1.5 ounce pours in them, and I'm like, this is a new vintage. I've not tasted or smelled any of these. Let's just do the compare and contrast and go from there. It's fun. I mean, you're right.
No, and it is fun, and everybody has their own different comparisons. But winemaking, everybody says, "Oh, it's a science," and I say, "Okay, yeah, I buy that. It is. There's a lot of scientific processes that happen,
But there's art to it as well.
There's definitely art to it."
Yeah.
And so, in a way, when you say you get excited about having these 5 glasses in front of you for this tasting, in a way, you're going to a gallery and you are viewing what that winemaker has produced and wants to showcase for you.
Right.
I really enjoy it, and like I said, we'll have many more to come on that. Investing in some tools to help you hone the sensory skills. This is something that's actually new to me. I've seen them advertised.
But you can get better.
You 100%
you can train your nose.
It's like anything else that the human mind, body, senses. I mean, we're a walking supercomputer.
Mm-hmm.
We can pretty much train ourselves to do anything.
Yeah, and the thing that you were hitting on was there's a couple of different stages to smelling something, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to be able to smell something and identify it in your own mind. What is that? First of all, you can do a general classification, right? Is it a fruit? Right? Okay. If it's a fruit, it's a fruit. And you should be able to tell if it's a fruit or a flower, right? I mean, because and maybe not, but I'm just saying, so there are high-level categories: floral, herbal, and fruit, right? And there may be some others that I'm leaving out. But then, so if you can just do that, that's how I would start, by just seeing if you can just identify those higher-level categories. Then when you get into the subcategories of fruit, which would be what? There would be tropical fruit, right? Or there would be red fruit like cherries, raspberries, and strawberries. Or there would be dark fruit like blackberries and currants and black currants and what else? Plum, maybe. Those are purple fruit, but plum and those kinds of things. Those are darker
Yeah, I mean, you get
fruit.
the sweet fruits, you get the dried fruits.
Yeah.
I mean, because you take a fresh peach smells different than a dried peach.
Yes.
I mean, you're going to get, and that's the case with most most fruits.
Yep. Well, you mentioned that, there are tools out there. And it just so happens that we have some of those tools right now in studio that we want to go over with you. For those of you who want to hone your sense of smell to a specific, those specific aromas relevant to wine, there's a scent kit that I purchased a few years back. It's the L'Anes du Vin wine scent kit. Now, they have many more. This one happens to be fabricated in France by this wine expert who's like the Muhammad Ali of wine in France, and he's well known and respected, and he sells these things. That they're a little bit expensive, and you're gonna have to pay quite a few $100, $300, $400, $500 for these kits. But they're the kinds of kits that are used by professionals, but they can come in really valuable as a tool or even a game you can play with your friends or at a wine party. You break this out at a wine party and you take out a little vial, and I'll show these to you, and we'll show you what these look like. The one kit that I'm talking about has 54 unique vials representing specific primary and secondary wine aromas. And you can get it on Amazon for around $450. And I will actually show you what this looks like here. It comes in a big box that has a lot of documentation in it too. It's got a variety of different booklets that give you. It's got a variety of different booklets that give you information about the different scents, where they come from, where they emanate from, what wines you might find these in, and so forth. And as you guys can see, there's an individual vial, 54 of these things, just for this primary master kit. And for each vial, there's a card, like a 3x5 index card, that has all of the specific information for that scent.
You should show one of the cards. Kind of hold it up to the camera.
How about you show them? So there, that's the master kit. There are 2 sub kits that you can buy that provide tertiary aromas and wine faults. And each one has only 12 in each one. They're less expensive, so for about $120, $130, you can get these. And these kits will last for many, many years. Yeah, that's the wine fault one right there that John Paul is showing you. And again, there's like 12 different wine faults. We have not had the time to sample the wine faults yet, but John Paul and I, about a month ago, actually opened up the big kit that I just showed you and started sampling 3 or 4 or 5 different ones each, and we would quiz each other on them. And what I learned was that John Paul is spot on a lot of times. I mean, he hit all but one, and the one that he missed, he was pretty close on. So anyway, these are really good tools that you can use, and they're all over the board. You can get some made in the U.S. and Canada, other countries. They vary in price from around low 100s up to $400 or $500, depending on how in-depth you want to get. But they're really useful, and they can last for many, many years. So I urge you, if you really want to hone in on your skill set when it comes to improving your ability to identify and discriminate aromas, this is the way to do it.
Yeah, and you mentioned the wine, like a wine tasting party.
Yeah,
bringing that thing out, it would be super fun, because just you and I sitting here, doing it. I learned a lot, and obviously you're having a nice glass of wine while you're playing the game.
Yeah,
so that's
exactly
the best part, right?
Yep.
But you mentioned the aroma wheels as well earlier.
Yeah, we talked about those.
Briefly hit on it. And honestly, these are a little less expensive way to get into it.
Yeah, but you know what I found with these wine wheels is that there's oftentimes when you're tasting a wine and you're like, oh, I know what that is, but I can't put a word to the flavor or to the aroma that I'm smelling. These are great for tasting and smelling. And so you'll look at it and you'll be like, that's a fruit, and I think it's a tropical fruit, but and then all of a sudden you can use these, and John Paul will show these on the camera here. He's got these wine aroma wheels. They are, they kind of look like a pie chart.
Yeah, a pie chart's a good way to explain it. And then on the back, it also has some further tasting notes, and not tasting notes, but aroma notes, like how to hold the glass, swirling the glass, what you should get. So it's kind of an introductory class, so to speak. And these are like, let's see, there's 4 of them that come. You have red wine, rosé, white wine, and sparkling wine, and you can get these for $25 for the 4.
Yeah.
But I mean, these are small enough to where you could take these with you tasting.
Yeah, I have done that.
And no one's going to look at you weird, because you know what?
They have them. They oftentimes will have those at tasting rooms.
Oh, okay. And I mean, and you're not going to get any weird looks, because you know what?
No. Everybody
else that's sitting in that tasting room, they're in the same boat you are.
That's exactly
They're like,
right.
oh man, I'm really excited to taste this, but where do I start? But these really just, like we were talking, so you have fruity, sweet, spice, nut, toasty, other, and then it goes into a 3rd and a 4th level and says caramelized, brown sugar, burnt caramel, cola. It really it really walks, like you said, oh man, I know what that is, but I don't.
Yeah, as you work your way from the center of the circle of the pie chart outward to the outer edges, you get to a more specific determination of what it is that you're smelling or tasting.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, and you use you talk about red fruit and black fruit.
Yeah.
You've mentioned it multiple times already. But when you get into red fruit, I mean, then you're into 10 different red fruits after that.
Yeah.
And so it may be one of those that they're raspberries and, fruit punch. have a very similar crossover,
Right.
and you can't place it. And then when you
Right.
see this on the wheel, you're like, oh, that's totally the raspberry.
Right.
So these are very, very handy and helpful, and I highly recommend them.
Yeah, you can get these at Wine Folly, winefolly.com, which is a really good place for graphics that are very, very understandable and that bring the whole world of wine to a level where anybody can understand it. Go out there, go to winefolly.com. I really highly recommend it. They have good reading materials and really good graphics. So, okay, we have just a few final tips for those, who are new to wine and just getting started and learning about wines and wine tasting. I would say, for me, don't be intimidated or embarrassed when sampling wine. It's all about how you're perceiving the wine, and if you like it, that's what counts. If you don't like it, that's also a good data point to put in your head, because you're going to go back out and you're going to find things that you like and don't like. And it's good to know both. That way you don't buy things that you don't like. But it's not about what somebody else says about the wine. And just like John Paul said earlier, a wine can be highly rated. It can be the flagship wine of a tasting room and cost $200, $250 a bottle. And you would anticipate that might be a really, really good wine, but it's not always. Okay, especially for you as a consumer, for your palate. Your palate may be different than whoever judged that wine and gave it 97 points, So always remember that. This whole thing is subjective. It's based on your sensory perception, which is your nose, your mouth, your eyes, your mouth feel that you get from the wine. It's all about you and how you perceive it.
Yeah, and just one more quick thing to add to that point on the intimidated or embarrassed. Don't worry about hurting the winemaker's feelings. They wouldn't be a winemaker if they were in the feelings business. I mean, they've been told everything about their wine that they could ever be told. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. And
they've experimented and thrown out their own wine, right?
No, exactly.
That's how they get to where they are. They go through a variety of different tasting trials every vintage.
But I can't stress enough, you don't have to like something.
You don't. Exactly.
So, and the other thing, as we move through some of these, the other one is I've been out tasting and you hear somebody hacking or sneezing or blowing their nose. And I'm like, if you're having those issues,
allergies,
I mean, unless you really just want to go out and be with the people you're with.
Right.
But don't expect to have a really good tasting or have your sensory perceptions be at 100% when you have any of those issues going on, because it definitely does affect it. The only thing with a cold that you can sometimes do is like we talked about, where you can open your mouth a little bit and get more of that. It allows it to come in the backside. Mm-hmm. It can help a little bit, but to me, it's just not worth it. If I have a cold, I'm not going wine tasting.
Yeah, because it's what you're relying on, right?
Yep.
I mean, like you wouldn't go out and play football if you didn't have any legs.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's the same thing. That's kind of on the edge, but I mean, wine tasting, you need your nose and you need your mouth. And when you have a cold or you got allergies, it shuts them both down pretty much.
100%.
So, yeah. I would say another tip for those who are really new to this is don't chew gum or suck on breath mints when you're out there. And believe me, I know people who have done it. I have a sister-in-law who will go unnamed, and this is the second podcast that I've mentioned this, but she would chew gum right up until the time we walk into the tasting room, or sometimes as we're being poured the wine. And my wife, her sister, would say, "Spit your gum out. What are you doing?" I forgot, But it will alter the experience with the wine. So gum, breath mints, that kind of stuff that will taint your palate at some level. Just forego that before you go wine tasting.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have that one person, man, I get a lot of cinnamon off this wine. Oh, no, that was your Altoids mint.
The Altoids mint.
And, the other big part of that, I kind of briefly mentioned it on the intimidated side. When you're in that tasting room, ask questions. That's the biggest thing. I mean, that's what they're there for. I mean, even if the winemaker themselves is not there, even if the manager of the tasting room isn't there for whatever reason, those employees that they hire, they're not just they don't come to them fully trained off the street knowing all this stuff about just their wine.
Right.
They get trained. They taste all the wines. They go through all of this process. So ask those questions, because you might be able to say something as simple as, I enjoy red blends that are heavier on this variety or this variety, and they can point you directly to something you may like.
Exactly. Or they'll oftentimes pull something out that they've got under the table that they weren't going to serve, but for people who may have, a different palate or may have different likes, they will pull that out and say, hey, try this. And oftentimes it just adds on to the experience where you're able to try something new and maybe you find something that you like.
No, it does. And the other question you can ask too is, hey, I smell this. Mm-hmm. And they might be able to say, they might laugh and say, oh, no, what you're smelling is actually this. And then once that correction has been made, now you can now that correlation is cemented in your body and your mind, and you now know, okay, if I smell that, that's how I perceive it. It's actually this scent.
Right. Exactly. Well, we covered a lot of ground today.
We did.
John Paul, thanks for joining me on this episode and for providing your perspectives and expertise when it comes to wine. I really appreciate the opportunity to have you on the show today. Thank you for joining us on Live the Good Life. And I hope you walk away from this episode, with a better understanding of wine aromas and why people actually take the time to smell the wine. That's all we have for today's episode. Again, for more of Living the Good Life, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Aaron's Wine Chronicles or online at aaronswinechronicles.com. And for a video podcast version of this episode, visit my YouTube channel at the @ Aaron's Wine Chronicles 6666. Well, thank you all for listening, and remember, wherever you go, whenever you can, always live the good life. Until next time.